Welcome to another broadcast from MindYourHealthcast.com. Those of you who were watching the last video on hypertension, the hype and facts. There's a lot of hype, and I have difficulty sometimes in getting across a principle that I keep seeing over and over, and as it relates to hypertension, among many other named supposed illnesses, conditions and symptoms basically are not illnesses per se. They're actually the symptoms of a disturbance of some sort. And so it's always difficult in the natural field, if you really understand it, dealing with someone calling you or coming in and saying, well, do you treat so-and-so? And of course my answer has to be no. I don't treat any disease per se. I don't treat symptoms per se. I treat people. And people are very complex, highly interconnected systems that develop symptoms when something has disturbed the system. And depending on the person and depending on the nature of the disturbance, certain symptoms will appear that are indicative of some interference with the body functioning properly. And so it's probably one of the hardest things that I have to deal with, and that someone who is out of the regular medical field, who decides to get into natural medicine, they have great difficulty because they carry with them that same idea that they have been trained into almost reflexively. A pain, you need a pain pill. Headache, you got to have a headache pill. Hypertension, you need a hypertension pill. And so what they do is they isolate one or more symptoms, give it a name, and then that is the target of the treatment. If they can reduce that number or increase that number, as the case might be, then they consider that an effective treatment. However, the treatment has done nothing more than, in some way, manage or control the symptom. Now, if you've controlled the symptom, you will change the numbers, but changing the numbers does not improve your health. That's the hardest thing for, as I say, people in the regular medical establishment, and a lot of people who even in the natural health field are trying to mimic the medical field, but what they're trying to do is to manage the symptoms with more natural things which they feel are probably less harmful to the body. However, that isn't always true. If you recall from the history of medicine, the original medications that the medical establishment had were herbs or derivatives from herbs. It's entirely possible to take an herb and take it to the point that you actually can poison and or kill someone if you so chose. So because it is indicated to be natural, whether it's a natural element, arsenic is a natural element, but arsenic doesn't do so well in any great amount in your body. And foxglove, which I think I've mentioned before, which is an herb high in digitalis, has been used for herbalists for ages. But again, I hate to say it, but the approach is to manage a symptom. Albeit, congestive heart failure is a pretty nasty symptom, but nonetheless, there's more to it than that. And so why are the people in congestive heart failure? What is the real problem? And so that's what we really want to deal with when we're dealing with hypertension. Hypertension is not a disease. Hypertension is a symptom. Okay, and that symptom can appear as a result of numerous disturbances in the body. Sometimes a singular disturbance in the background may lead to elevated blood pressure. Sometimes a deficiency could lead to elevated blood pressure. Sometimes your mental state could lead to elevated blood pressure. So what I'm getting at is the modern idea of treating numbers and pictures is really not solving our health problems. If you think it is, then just look at the numbers and they speak for themselves. Are we healthier than before? Or do we have less illnesses than before? Are there less chronic diseases than before? Are they less acute? If you cannot answer yes, then that tells you that something is wrong with the methodology. Now, it takes a while for that to sink in. We are so used to doing it reflexively. Oh, yeah, I got elevated cholesterol. My number's high. Okay, so we need to have a cholesterol-lowering drug. So years ago, it was discovered that red yeast rice had some chemical compounds in it that would interfere with the function of liver cells in synthesizing cholesterol. Wow, what a discovery. Now, of course, it does that at a cost. Anytime you interfere with a normal body function, what happens? You generate other issues. And in this case, the red yeast rice can damage and or could destroy your liver if given the right amount. Now, interestingly, medicine discovered that, and guess what? They basically have made their TORs out of, Lipitor and Crestor and all those TORs, the statins, red yeast rice. Now, along come the people in the natural health field and say, whoa, you don't want to take that nasty drug to lower your cholesterol. You should take red yeast rice. Now, what are they doing? Why is the cholesterol up? I don't know. It's high. Why is it high? I never thought why it's high. We just know the number's high, and if the number's high, we need to get it down. Why do you have to get it down? I guess it could cause some cardiovascular problems and maybe increase your risk of a heart attack. Oh, well, where is the solid scientific research that has established that? Well, let me see. I think I heard of something called the Framingham study once. Yeah, there was one. However, that's not what it established. So anyhow, we go round and round with all this stuff, and I don't blame the public because they're confused. You see 1,000 ads a day on the television talking about this symptom and that symptom and this drug for that symptom and this symptom, and then you see the picture of the person who comes on with this very distressed look and say, I was blindsided. And we don't want you to be blindsided. Of course, it's in gray tone and looking very down and depressed. And then they say, oh, well, I found out about this drug, and if I take this, then my numbers go down, and I can live happily ever after. And then you see them out in the country, in the field, looking at the cow eating grass, a bright sunshiny day, the sky is blue, and this person and their family are all big smile on their face. Everything is great, and they live happily ever after. Except it's not right. Not accurate. There's no research that establishes that. But nonetheless, people buy the ads. And whether consciously or unconsciously, they're influenced by them. And so when your number goes up, then we've got to do something with that number. So if we treat that number and we force that number down, have we solved the problem? Of course not. The answer is no. So what is hypertension or any of these cardiovascular problems? And so we're going to talk about some of the background issues. We kind of presented the problem last time. And once we know the problem, the question is, what or how can we approach this problem to help the person become a healthier person? Well, if pushing the number down solves the problem, it sounds great, but it does not of necessity. What solves the problem is what was the problem. And then, when we know what the problem is, we can resolve the problem. Now, as I say, this has been in several years now. I've been extremely frustrated because I'm always dealing with the issue. Somebody called in and said, "Do you treat cancer?" No, I don't treat cancer. I treat people. I don't want to try to kill cancer. I want to try to make people healthy and to improve their immune system so it can heal itself, but I certainly am not interested in trying to kill cancer cells. The body can do that very adeptly if it is up to par. And so the first thing we need to know is, what does it take to get the body up to par? Now, it's true you can temporarily debulk a tumor by cutting it out. You can fry the tumor and the surrounding tissues with radiation. You can poison the whole body with chemotherapy and shut down the immune system. And so for a while it will appear like you're okay. But nothing that was done in that regimen has done anything to correct the body as to why. Now, we're going to be doing another broadcast shortly that I think you will find fascinating. There was a book written several years ago called The Hidden Cause of Cancer, and of course there's been a bunch of them like that. And I've read probably all or at least most of them. And I think I've heard every theory about cancer, but there are some basic facts that really set the stage for a cell to mutate, and once mutated, continue to grow out of control until you have a cancer or a tumor. And so that is what we want to look at. The evidence has been there since the first part of the 1900s. It's no secret. It's just that people don't pay attention because it sounds too simple. And so we could not make $1 million off of a person if we had to make a few minor adjustments in their life that could allow their bodies to correct itself. That would not be good. It would be good for the person, but not good for the medical system. So, we will be doing a broadcast very shortly, maybe even following this one. I'm not sure. I don't think we're going to finish this today. I thought maybe we could do it in 2 sessions, but there's so many things. I hope you're getting from me the idea that health isn't that simple anymore. It was at one time. I remember when I was young, hardly anyone went to a doctor. I did not only know, I did. I knew of one case of cancer in the town that we lived in, and I knew of one cardiovascular problem that is because the person had been born with a defective heart. So that we're talking about a birth condition, not something that developed. Okay, so more often than not, people went to a doctor for a cut or a bruise or a bang or a broken bone or suspected broken bone. I would say that would be the highest percentage. So at that time, most medical doctors and osteopathic doctors who were around, because the town that we were in, there were no chiropractors at that point, and there were no naturopaths in that town. There was 2 types of doctors. There was one osteopath and originally when I was very small, 2 or 3 MDs, and that was it. So anyhow, as we watch this develop, and I'm looking now back at that period of time, hardly anyone would ever go to a hospital in their whole life. Babies were born at home. I was born at home. My sister, 3 years younger than me, was born at home. Um, you rarely actually went to a doctor. I was taken once because I was bitten with a copperhead snake on the back of my hand when I was about between 3 and 4 years old. I guess about 4 years old. I got this bite on the back of my hand, and that was a bit of a problem. But my mother pretty well solved it before I ever got to the doctor's office, because she administered her farm upbringing first aid that she had been taught, and I think that really pretty much took care of the problem. My dad then finally did get home from work, took me back to town, and we went to the local doctor, who I realized years later was a doctor of osteopathy, but he was also a homeopath, and I remember all the little bottles on the shelf of the little white tablets or pills, and it clicked that he was really a homeopath. Anyhow, he did his treatment on my hand, and I had no adverse effects. However he did it, he verified at the time. He said it's copperhead venom. And anyhow, I recovered with no problems, other than originally it hurt like crazy and I had a swollen hand that swelled to double size pretty fast. But apart from that, I didn't really have any after effects. And it left no fear in me, because my dad said 2 or 3 weeks later, he and I went fishing, and I picked up a snake out of the water and held it up and said, "Hey, look at this." So it never put a fear in me of snakes, so that's good. At any rate, it's when you look at it now, medicine is a major industry in this country. I mean, everybody you see is carrying a bag of pills with them. They sit down to eat someplace, and they've got to take these before, these after, and these during, and they sit around, and if you think your problems are bad, wait till I tell you about my problems, or my doctor says, and those are the conversations you hear. So something major has changed over the years, and it is the development of a medical industry. Now, coexisting with that, and we'll talk about that in a minute, something else went on that fed the medical establishment, and the two became like this. And any attempts to regulate those have been curtailed and overridden to the point that it really means nothing. They pretty much have free reign today. And I guess, it is a multi-trillion-dollar business now. So, it's really hard. I've known people to be killed for a whole lot less than that. And $10,000, I was told by a person I met one time, can make a truck driver very reckless on a mountain road when somebody is approaching from the opposite direction, and things of that nature. So it's, I hate to sound like a cynic, and I'm not a cynic, I'm a realist. I just have learned the way the world functions. So, getting back to this blood pressure thing, it all fits together. I'm wanting you to expand your thinking and get out of the rut of these various symptoms being a disease. Tonsillitis, the most common one you encounter early in your life. What is tonsillitis? Literally, it means inflamed tonsils, okay? Is that a disease? It's a condition. What's caused the condition? If you go to a doctor and you say, my throat is sore, it hurts, and I got a little fever, and he looks in your throat and he says, well, yep, you got tonsillitis. It could even be strep throat. We're going to give you some antibiotics and maybe an anti-fever drug. And you say, well, if my tonsils are inflamed, why are they inflamed? Well, who knows? You could have picked up a virus. I mean, we don't know, but you don't have to worry about it. This will take care of it. Okay, so something is wrong. Now, it's possible your body is taking care of a virus, but it's also highly possible it's trying to take care of something else in your body, and you have no idea why. But if you turn that off, what's going to happen to the problem that initiated the body to create that response? And so the same is true with hypertension. There's a lot of things that can be happening in the body. that can lead to it. So hypertension is not a disease. Hypertension is a symptom of a problem. And of course, medicine has created a set of numbers. So if your numbers are this and this, you are not hypertensive. But if you step over the line to the next number, you are. To me, there's a great problem with that kind of logic. And in fact, it doesn't make any scientific sense at all. How can you be diabetic at one number and one number less not be diabetic? There's still going to be a lot of sugar in your system that your body should have been able to clear, but just not quite 1 point. And if you throw in the factor that a test is probably minimal 10% inaccurate, meaning it can go 10% one way or the other, because it all was based on, did you get a fraction of a drop less or more of the sample when it was put into the measuring equipment? Did you standardize it accurately, or are you off a point or two in the standardization of the equipment? I mean, there's just a whole chain of variables. And I say it's being conservative to say that the accuracy is a very minimum, plus or minus 10%. It may be more. And then, of course, there's a lot of other factors if they got the wrong sample, for example. And that can happen. In today's world of high-tech, high-speed testing, it's very easy to get the wrong sample. And so all of a sudden, it comes back. And in fact, there was a movie done with Jerry Lewis based on that. Yeah, I think it was Jerry Lewis. Anyhow, this guy thought he was going to die. He took his credit cards. His wife encouraged him to go and see the world and don't worry about it, because if he ran up the cards, he wouldn't be around to have to worry about paying them anyhow. And of course, about a few weeks into the trip, he finds out that there was an error, and that really was not his prognosis and diagnosis, and consequently, he was in deep, deep trouble. So, the blood pressure, there's so many variables that can affect it, because the blood pressure is responsive to so many other things that are happening. So, some of those could be serious, and some may be trivial, such as a dietary problem. And so if it's a dietary problem, of course, you could correct it by changing the dietary issue. Maybe it's a stress problem, then you could change it by changing the stress issue. So if you really want to get well, you have to find out what's going on in your body. And then once you find out what's going on in your body, then your chances of correcting it are very good. And once you've corrected that, you don't have the problem. Now see, I'm thinking back many, many years ago. I knew this gentleman, and he was really peeved when I was talking to him at his doctor. I wonder why. Anyhow, he went to his doctor one time, and doctor took his blood pressure and said, "Oh, you have hypertension. We're going to have to put you on some medication." And being a good patient, he listens to his doctor, and so he writes him a prescription. He starts taking it, and wow, he gets all these terrible effects. So he goes back to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Well, I guess we'll have to change you to another medication." And of course, now there's about 100 medications on the market, all targeting a symptom called hypertension. So he is written a second prescription. So he goes and buys that, and he starts taking that, and he feels really lousy with that. He's hardly functional. So he goes back to the doctor and says, "I can't take that stuff either." So he writes him a third prescription. And with trepidation, he goes and buys this third prescription, and he starts taking it, and lo and behold, he feels terrible with that one. He can hardly function. So he goes back to the doctor and says, "Well, gee, I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't take any of those drugs." And back then, when I'm talking about, there weren't that many on the market. So the doctor said, "Well, there is another way you can handle that without the drugs." And so he teaches them about learning to relax. And wow, was he angry. I don't know that he said it to the doctor, but he said it to me. Why didn't the doctor tell me that in the first place instead of giving me these lousy drugs? And so he did. He dropped his blood pressure down, and he kept it down with his own own mind. So I'm not saying that would always be the case, because you could be doing something else that's actually causing a disturbance in your body that's leading to elevated blood pressure. And there's so many things you could do, and so those are some of the things we're going to talk about. And I know it's very confusing because there is so much out there anymore, so much information, and so many drugs, as I say, about 100 now, for medication, for blood pressure alone. Now, when you look at all the others, like cholesterol, the whole thing of cardiovascular problems, when you go back and study the history, they were almost non-existent in the late 1800s up to the early 1900s. It was starting, but there still weren't that many. But it was so few in the 1800s back along the way that the medical books didn't even include cardiovascular diseases as a problem. Nor did they talk very much about cancer except as a rarity. And so there was a lot of things going on during that period of time that suddenly in the 1900s began to blossom, and by the latter part of the 1900s had become epidemic, and now into the 2000s are terrible. Now, if modern medicine has been doing the right job, wouldn't you anticipate that all of those things would be so low that as to be almost non-existent if it was doing its job? Well, there are big problems, and the big problems are there are so many variables that we have to deal with today, so many intrusions into our body and our life, and so many deficiencies that we've got major problems. For example, just to throw this in real fast, I'll be talking a little bit about nutrition as being one of the issues why we could have hypertension symptom along with a lot of other symptoms. But that might be the prevailing one. When you go to a doctor's office, as soon as he can find a symptom or two to write a prescription, that's the fastest way to get you out the door, and we'll worry about whatever else is down the road. So here, hey, you got hypertension. Now, I will say this that you need to be aware of. The recommended way to prescribe out of regular medicine for hypertension is when you go into the office, they take your blood pressure. If it is elevated, then you should wait for a while, 10, 15, 20 minutes. Then take it a second time. If it's still high, but maybe not quite as high, you're supposed to wait again and take it a third time. And only after 3 times with a time separation between of taking the blood pressure would you then consider that it's an issue to address. I'm sure you all heard of the white coat syndrome. A lot of people are so anxious about their blood pressure that as soon as somebody says, I'm going to take your blood pressure, their blood pressure goes up. And when they see somebody with that stethoscope, the modern sign, now they all wear it hanging around their neck. If you don't wear a stethoscope hanging around your neck, you're not a doctor, or a nurse, or a PA, or a practitioner, or whatever anymore. They all have to have, and I've seen some of the people in the natural health field now get their picture taken with a stethoscope hanging around their neck. I think I would do it if I was making a joke about it. But that would be the only reason I would do that. To me it looks stupid to begin with. Now, if you were in an emergency room and you wanted your stethoscope right there in case you wanted to see if their heart was beating or not, I suppose it's okay. But just to walk around with a stethoscope around your neck, get your picture taken with a stethoscope hanging around your neck, it's just another one of those symbols. And so sometimes I get so frustrated with the health field and with people, and people are so dependent. They throw their welfare and their health on somebody else's doorstep and will take whatever's given to them. And I my big purpose in putting up this whole set of videos that I've done over the last couple of years or so is to attempt to wake people up. I'm throwing this at you, and sometimes in a provocative way, because I want you to go and look and find out for yourself. You should become an educated consumer. If you're paying $2.7 trillion a year for a sick bill, you might want to have the ability to ask some of the right questions before you dive into things, because sometimes the treatment's worse than the problem. And if you drop dead or are permanently impaired because you were given a drug that really would have been better you didn't take, or that they find out down the road after it's been released, the fact is that drugs, you don't know much about them until they go on the market. Contrary to what you might think of all the testing that's done previous to going on the market, it's a series of steps. But the very last step with a new drug is what's called the post-release trial. I've mentioned this before. The post-release trial is once the FDA says, okay, you can go ahead and sell it, and they start writing a lot of prescriptions, then they find out what the drug does to people. Now, sometimes it's fairly innocuous, and then other times it can be fatal. And so I've known of some that are even still in the market. One in particular, 50,000 people dropped dead in a short period of time after it was released on the market, the post-release trial. 50,000 dropped dead just like that, sitting, standing, walking, just fall over dead. An antiarrhythmic drug, and guess what? It's still on the market. Why? Because it never got any press. And it didn't, for whatever reason, didn't connect, it didn't get in the news. And so because it didn't, people didn't bring any suits, or very few probably. And so it's still out there, because you are proving it for them. They didn't have to spend the money to try it with 2,000 or 3,000 people or 5,000 people. They tried it for maybe 2 or 3 or 4 dozen people, not very many. I doubt if they ever exceed 100, if that. And here we're talking about thousands and thousands of people are going to be taking this drug, so you really don't know anything about it in terms of any long-term effects. If it didn't kill you right off, which is mostly what the pre-studies are going to tell you, and it's tested on animals to find out the LD50, how many milligrams per kilogram of body weight will it take of this drug to kill 50% of the lab animals it's being tested on. And that is called the LD50, and that's how they use to determine the dose for humans. If they actually do the test, and I've mentioned before that in some cases the test never got done. Somebody made up the results, turned it over, and they released the drug. And my suspicion is that that might have happened with the one I'm talking about for the cardiac. So here it goes out on the market, and pop, all these people die, but as long as this doesn't get any big press, we'll just forget about it and keep on prescribing it. And because of the nature of it, how many people are going to associate it was the drug that did it? Because there's no rhyme or reason. You're taking it, and all of a sudden one day you fall over. So they say, well, gee, the bad person had a worse cardiovascular problem than we thought, and his heart was more in jeopardy than we thought, and so he dropped dead. So does somebody go back and say, oh, hey, they were taking that drug? Well, they don't know about it. Unless you happen to have stumbled onto the information, you would know about it. That's why I'm saying get yourself educated. Okay, so I mentioned last time when we were defining all this blood pressure stuff that the body has a regulatory system that takes care of all kinds of things via feedback to the autonomic nervous system. And so if the blood pressure goes down, there's a sensor at the renal artery called a barosensor that is measuring the pressure of the blood coming into the kidneys. And so that signal is sent back, oh, the blood pressure is low. So then it gets in the brain, it goes through a series of processes, a message goes out, contract those vessels so we don't lose too much blood. There may be a blood leak someplace. And so the arteries tighten up. So, if, on the other hand, if the chemosensors in your neck and the carotids measure the blood going to the brain and it's low in oxygen, a message goes to the brain speed up the heartbeat, pump more blood through because there's not enough oxygen in it, and so you increase heart rate. And so those are a couple of the feedback mechanisms in the body. And then there's the fight and flight response, which means if something scares you, there's a message goes to the adrenals, dump adrenaline into the blood, which contracts the blood vessels, and now we're ready to rumble, so to speak, or run like crazy. And so, same thing if you change your posture. You know, if you're sitting and you decide to stand up, guess what gravity does? It pushes the blood out of your head. How does your body counteract that? As soon as that adrenaline is released, as your body starts to change position, the adrenals are triggered, they throw adrenaline in the blood, the immediate response of adrenaline, tighten up the blood vessels, hold the blood pressure up into the head so you don't get dizzy and fall over when you stand up. So these are some of those automatic mechanisms. And when you begin to understand more and more about how all this works, it all begins to make sense. And so then you can, in a particular person's case, analyze what's going on with that person and determine what can you do to help them change their life that they can allow their body to settle down and not be like that. Now, we do have the problem of arteriosclerosis, which means over time the arteries getting stiff so that they're less inclined to expand or contract. Now, everybody says that that's aging, and potentially I guess it could be true, but you know what? I'm convinced more and more, as one of the big things we're going to be talking about is nutrition, is that nutritional deficiencies are a major, major player in our health, and in particular the minerals. Now, years ago, a doctor equated hypertension, blood pressure being up, with deficiencies, and in particular magnesium. And so his name was Dr. Myers, and so he developed a test called the Myers cocktail test. And so what they would do, they would test somebody's blood pressure that it was continuing to run higher, and then they would take a large syringe with a solution containing a larger amount of magnesium and some other nutrients, and they would plug it into your vein and do a push, which means you just inject it slowly right directly into the vein over about 5 to 8 minutes, and then you just wait a minute or two and check the blood pressure again. Now, if the blood pressure came way down, there's a pretty good indication that the person has a magnesium deficiency, and therefore, are you going to give them a hypertensive medication with all of its adverse effects, or are you going to see that they either increase the food that they're eating and that it has magnesium in it, or you have them supplement magnesium? Sometimes it's not that simple. Sometimes if a person is really deficient in magnesium and they take magnesium, it makes them feel bad. And so there's a way of getting around that. Number one would be direct IVs, and number two would be the form of magnesium you use. There seems to be one that works well when the person has a magnesium deficiency, but every time they take magnesium, it makes them feel really bad. And it's an irony because sometimes the body has gone over the edge with a problem, and then after that, it's not so easy to get it turned around, but it can be. So the deficiency problem is a major problem today. It started way, way, way back in late 1800s. They were already writing about nutritional deficiencies and soil depletion. By the early 1900s, cardiovascular problems were on the increase, cancer was on the increase, diabetes was on the increase, neurological problems were on the increase, gastrointestinal problems were on the increase, and behavioral problems were on the increase. Now, gee, at the same time, the food, when you measured it, is that it was less and less nutrient containing. It was depleted. And so with the depletion of nutrients, you end up with a big problem. And so one of the very first things that you need to address, and this was proven during that period of time, I brought it up in my broadcast before, it was proven that the soil was depleted, the nutrients were depleted in the food, and when you ate those, your body was depleted, and hence you started to develop problems. One of the very first ones was cardiovascular, and as I said, cancer, diabetes, all of those things that today people are paying billions of dollars for pills and treatments started because of nutrient deficiency. So to me, if you're going to correct a problem like this, you need the very first thing to address the nutritional issues and find out what's going on. Now, the big players in the body are the minerals. And if you don't have enough minerals in your body, a lot of things cannot happen. Minerals are catalysts. Now, there's been far too little study of the minerals. There is to a degree, we talk about calcium, magnesium, and zinc, and a few of the nutrients, but we don't really get into it in detail, and it's never emphasized very much. But those minerals in the body act as cofactors. A cofactor is something that when an enzyme approaches a substrate to cause it to either break apart or join together, there is an energizer that comes along like a booster and makes that work well, and that cofactor is a mineral atom or a molecule. Now, minerals can be high energy or low energy, and when they get depleted in your body, guess what happens? They're expelled in the urine. So they have to be replaced. How do we replace minerals? Well, normally it would be with food if the food contains the minerals. However, my measurements of modern day food is that it's pretty lousy at best, that there's not enough minerals there. Minerals affect not only the taste of the food, but the action of the food in your body. So if the mineral either can't be absorbed, or if it doesn't get absorbed, it's very low energy, it's not going to do a lot to help you. And as I say, is that energy that was stored up in that healthy mineral from a healthy source, like good earth and in a good vegetable or fruit, gets into your body. Once that energy is used up, as I say, it's thrown out. It's useless. It's just now debris floating around, but it can't do the job. I believe very strongly, and there's reasons for it, and it's beyond what we're going to talk about in this broadcast, but nonetheless, the minerals gain energy because of the way they are pulled from the soil into a plant. And that's what makes them useful in the body, because they're like little batteries of energy, and when that energy is used up, they're no longer any use to the body, and they're expelled in the urine. Same with enzymes. When the enzymes that are built by the body are used for a while, they reach a point that they're no longer useful. They've expended their capability, and so the body breaks them down and lets go of them because they're no longer useful. Say that the wisdom of the body is tremendous. If given the things that the body needs, and you've learned how to manage your stress, and you don't expose yourself or overexpose yourself to too many of the toxins of the day, then your body can take care of itself. There's very few cases that it can't. I mean, the body is so complex and so interwoven and so powerful, if it has anything to run on properly, as to what it can do. So as I say, when we get into what do you do with the blood pressure, the very first step has to be the nutritional status of the person and the emotional status or the stress status of the person. Those are the first two things you have to look at. Now, yeah, you could take an herb. There's herbs like Wolfia serpentina that will tend to push your blood pressure down, but that is allopathic medicine. I don't care if it's an herb or not. When you are using those type of things, herbs or high levels of a single nutrient without addressing the whole nutritional issue, you're going to cause problems. And you're just doing allopathic medicine because you haven't solved the problem. And if you want to solve the problem, you want the person's blood pressure to be down and stay down. You don't want to have to keep taking, after your body gets used to that, then we got to get something else, and so then we try something else. But in the meantime, the damage can be done with a management chemical. Now, herbs are, in my mind, the middle ground between homeopathic medicine and allopathic medicine, meaning an herb can be used homeopathically or it can be used allopathically depending on concentration. So if you use a very small amount of an herb, it would be leaning toward the homeopathic side, which is the normalizing side. If you use a large amount, then it is a controlling substance, which means it either shuts down or overstimulates, but it's not balancing anymore. So you've got the two ends of the spectrum on an herb, and as I said, the early allopathic drugs all came from herbs. So hence, that is a problem that people in the natural health field have not addressed in general. You don't manage the symptoms, you correct the problem that is causing the body to produce the symptoms. And that is very difficult for people to grab onto because everybody's always thinking this for that. We look at the numbers and then we wanted this for that. We look at the picture, wow, there's a big lump in your body, we've got to do something. We've got to cut it out, we've got to burn up the tissue around it, we got to, blah, blah, blah. We get through all this stuff and we haven't solved the problem. But I'll tell you what, it's highly profitable. So, of course, that's the driver. Now, as we go through the rest of this, which we're going to have to finish next time, we're going to give you areas that you need to look into to address, and let's say a high percentage of them you can do yourself. And if you can key into the right area that you're going to address, then guess what? You are going to be able to be knowledgeable in how to be healthy. The more you learn, the more you can take care of your own health. I don't care if you put me out of business. I would rather that in the process you learn how to be healthy and then you can stay healthy. I know that's not the motivation of big corporations. They want to make money, and the more money they make, the more they want to make, and hence the more ways they come up with to make more money, i.e., requiring the doctor to try to push the numbers lower and therefore needing more people on the drug. Good way to increase your profit in a year is to go from 16 to 18 million prescriptions to 36 million prescriptions in 1 year by changing the numbers. Sounds fascinating. And it works, at least for them. But again, I ask one single little question. Are we healthier? No. We're not. It's not working. Okay, I think we've used up our time. So we are going to finish the next time. As I mentioned, and these are some things you could look in for yourself. Number one, I would go and get the book off of the internet called Toxemia Explained, revised edition by Dr. J.H. Tilden, M.D., out of Denver, Colorado, first published in 1926. The last printing edition of it was 1935, and he understood stuff that a lot of the doctors still don't understand about the body. So that's one thing I would do. And I would start looking into nutrition in terms of hypertension and how hypertension relates to the whole body. Number two, I would look into how you eliminate either taking in all the poisons from the environment or helping your body to get rid of them. And you're going to find that for Toxemia Explained to work, your body has to be properly nutritioned. It has to have the right things in it. Now, it's interesting because he was in Colorado, and I know the soil around areas where there's huge mountain ranges have come out of deep in the earth is rich in minerals. So I'm guessing that at the time he was working, it wasn't such a big problem, the quality of the food, if they were eating natural unprocessed foods. Today, even if you try to eat natural unprocessed foods, there's still a problem because of the soil depletion. And the third big thing is the mental emotional side, and those are the three general areas. We've talked more about the nutrition today, and we'll be talking more about, we want to finish that because there's some other issues. And in the meantime, if you want to get a book, or at least look at it, called Water and Salt, you're going to find it very interesting because we're going to talk about salt in relation to all of this. And we're going to talk about a few other things and bring it all together to a conclusion. I hope you're following me, but the chances are probably about 98 to 99% that anybody who really wants to educate themselves a little bit can get their body back in balance and will not need to take a medication. I'm not saying there's not some strange, rare, unusual situation where something's missing out of the body or something's been damaged and it may be difficult to fix it. Then that could be a case where I could see management might be a problem. You know, if you have your thyroid cut out, then you're probably going to have to take some substitute for the rest of your life because your body does not work well without the hormones related to the thyroid. And if you don't have a thyroid, you're probably going to have to take that. So there are some cases where people have done some radical things to their body, and consequently they have no choice anymore. Well, you know, I say that's true. I don't know. There's still some interesting things about what the body capabilities are beyond our discussion now. Maybe somewhere down the road we'll get into that in more detail. At any rate, it was nice being with you again. Go to our website, mindyourhealthcast.com, and be sure and come back to the exciting conclusion of our drama that we're presenting. And hopefully I'll give you some insightful things that will be beneficial. Every broadcast I do, even though I pick a particular subject, I want to show you how it all interconnects so that I don't want you thinking that we see the body as a box of pieces, because all the parts of our body are interconnected. The systems are all interconnected, and anytime you change one system, it's going to affect other systems. So I'm working to expand your insight so no matter what the subject is, you kind of can get it into the context of the bigger picture, and you begin to see how complex and how wise the body is in maintaining itself if it has half a chance. Until the next broadcast, be healthy.